The demand arrived as a chord that hurt to hear harmonics stacked like glass knives while the sky over Neptune flickered with the silhouettes of ships that bent starlight. Commander Anaya Reyes didn't blink. The outer screen showed the Sensorum Prefecture's crest rotating over a wire frame of the solar net. Species Sol 3, the voice intoned, precise as an invoice, acknowledge accession. Transfer tribute. Recite the language oath. Around her, the civic defense bridge hummed, air scrubbers, people breathing, 1,000 tiny defiances. Patch me to President Hughes, Anaya said. She kept her hands flat so no one saw them tremble. The prefecture had chosen a weekday morning commerce hours, maximum psychological slip. They'd studied others. They always did. Empires refine cruelty like artisans. Hughes' face filled the corner display gray-haired, eyes a calm lake in bad weather. Commander, do we have the package? We do. Anaya looked at the single line waiting in the queue. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a law. Article 0, hashed into every civic node by a million jurors in a rolling quorum. A one-word amendment that no single official could rescind, not even a president with the weight of Earth behind him. On my mark, Hughes said. The prefecture ships adjusted into a sphere. Their demonstration vessels slid toward Ganymede, the same choreography they'd used at Oryx, at Kel 9, at all the places that learned to live on their knees. In the pit, Reyes' tactical officer, Lieutenant Cho, whispered, "They'll lance the domes. 50,000 souls." "Not if our tugs hold," Anaya said. "Neptune net is green. Every hauler we have, every miner who ever welded in vacuum. They're coming." She heard it then, behind the fans and feeds, the quiet roar of a species moving. Civilians answering a line in code because the oath demanded by the Sensorum had been met with a different oath entirely ours. Not the surrender of tongues, but their liberation. Article 0 contained one syllable, written in every language we owned and a few we borrowed. No. "Mark," Hughes said. Anaya sent it. The network didn't just transmit, it notarized. Across Luna Quartz, Martian communes, belt unions, the same checksum confirmed, the Republic's constitution now began with a refusal. Any packet asserting submission would be invalid by design, rejected like a pathogen by a body that finally recognized itself. Sensorum sensors caught the burst and recalculated. Their flagship's helm feathered, restacking files. The demand repeated, clinical, recite the oath. The language oath did what empires had done since Rome bind conquered mouths so conquered minds would follow. The prefecture mandated vowel corrections, idiom prohibitions, approved metaphors, a grammar engineered for compliance. They built prisons out of syntax. Anaya cut transmission and opened a different channel, low band, earthwide. "This is Commander Reyes," she said. "The prefecture has arrived. They will test us at Ganymede. We will hold. Juror nodes are active. Your word is law now, say it with us." Her voice went out on amateur antennae in schoolyard mesh. She didn't need to coach the answer, it came back in every accent, rising like wind against steel. The outer display flashed. "Demonstration lance arming," Cho said. "Trigger Dunkirk protocol," Anaya ordered. History didn't repeat, she'd learned, but logistics did. In 1940, ordinary boats had threaded a death channel to lift armies out from under a boot. Today the boats had fusion hearts and asteroid scars and names stenciled in chalk: neighborhood, second chance. Teachers' pet tug crews tightened their harnesses and eased into paths that any sane chart would mark impossible. The first prefecture beam carved space like a sunspill. The Ganymede convoy spun their mirrors and threw regolith into the beam's throat. It scattered across the improvised ablative layer ice, aluminum, mined basalt, scrap, the kind of armor societies build when they decide everyone belongs to the war effort because everyone belongs to the world. "Sir," Cho said, voice thin, "they are changing harmonics. They are going to slice the net." "Then we braid it," Anaya said. "All tugs crossbind. If one line fails, 10 hold." Screens multiplied, each a life in motion: a miner in a saint's jersey laughing through fear, an old woman from Oaxaca tightening a coolant clamp with fingers that remembered harvests, a teenager at a Bell terminal translating hand signals for a Yuli refugee who'd sworn never again to ride under someone else's flag. Anaya thought of Midway and a trick with AF is short of water, how a false radio leak exposed Japanese intent. She pinged a leak series had coolant shortages just loud enough for the prefecture to hear. 2 enemy cruisers edged to adjust their kill lines. A wedge opened. "Now," she whispered, and the tugs surged. Ganymede's domes held. Not unscarred, no honest victory is. But the lances had gone elsewhere, chewed by sand the color of work and love. A cheer swept the bridge and died just as fast. Far above, the prefecture's sphere tightened. Their reply came down like etiquette: "Species Soul 3, you will comply." President Hughes appeared again. He didn't look like a man who thought compliance was possible or desirable. "Commander, they'll escalate." "We'll educate," Anaya said, and only later would she realize how arrogant that sounded. The display dimmed as the flagship's main emitter bloomed. "Parhelan array," Cho breathed. It could saw continents. The Dunkirk line shivered. Anaya hit fleet-wide. "All hands, Article 0 is in force. If you can move, you are the line. If you can't, you are the reason. Hold." The array brightened, a second sun. "Contact," Cho said. "All stations reporting." The lights went out. Cliffhanger. Emergency strips bled amber along the deck. Power relays snapped like angry birds. Somewhere deep in the hull, the reactor coughed and caught. Light returned thin as morning through fog. The Parhelan flare had not hit them yet, but it had kissed the net hard enough to leave teeth marks. Ganymede still lived. Anaya's throat unclenched. "Damage?" she asked. "Grid shear, 3 capacitors fried, 2 tugs spun out," Cho said. "We've got a hole the size of Manhattan in a mirror braid. Can we patch?" "Not with what we have on board." "Then we'll patch with who we are," Anaya said. It wasn't rhetoric. Article 0 hadn't been born in a war room. It had been drafted in kitchens and union halls by coders who quoted Marcus Aurelius while stirring lentils, by pastors who knew the weight of vows, by a civil rights historian whose grandmother had counted bus schedules in Montgomery to map a boycott's spine. They'd argued about proportionality, about just war, about whether refusal could be an act of aggression. In the end, They wrote a single syllable and wrapped it in process so sturdy that even cowards would lean on it and feel brave. Anaya opened the juror channel. Article 0 Quorum. Confirm patch authority. Responses cascaded millions of tiny lights granting consent. In the prefecture, commands flowed down like winter, here, up like spring. Authority granted, Cho said, almost reverent. The patch wasn't duct tape, it was doctrine. Every fishing satellite became a repeater, every school bus on Luna a power reservoir, every water tower on Mars a heat sink. The braid regrew, a living thing. Meanwhile, their false leak about Ceres had done its work too well. 2 prefecture cruisers' sleek blades had peeled toward the belt. They'll torch the mines, Cho said. Or they'll find what we left for them, Anaya murmured. The belt had rigged surprise in plain sight, magnetic sand canopies, blast-hewn cul-de-sacs, tug-drag ice curtains that refracted guidance beams like carnival mirrors. Crude, yes. Effective, only sometimes. But the trick at Midway had never been about perfection, it had been about persuasion. She pinged the Ceres defense net. The reply came from a foreman with slurry on his boots. Commander Reyes? My crew can hold 2 lanes. Maybe 3 if we burn the loaders. Don't burn the loaders, Anaya said. You'll need them when this is over. When? He echoed, tasting the future like a hard candy he wasn't sure he deserved. Commander, Cho cut in. Refugee traffic on the Yuli band. The Yuli had been the prefecture's polite clients for centuries, orthopodial mathematicians who treated law like a weather system. Now their metrics had flickered. A convoy had slipped the leash and was threading Seoul's outskirts, trusting rumors that humans had made their word unbreakable. They are running through our minefield, Cho said. If we don't open a lane, the humans we save at Ganymede will be balanced by aliens we kill in the dark. A dilemma without poetry. Anaya thought of the principles they'd argued so hard about non-combatant immunity that 2 philosophers had stopped speaking. She remembered another history, Allied pilots turning away from bombers when civilians filled the sites, logistics officers in the civil rights era cushioning marches with food lines and childcare because ethics didn't end at the edge of a cause. Open a lane, she said. Detonate charges early. We'll expose a flank. Commander, that invites a spear? Then we'll take the spear and build a handle out of it. They blew corridor lights along the minefield's spine. Refugee signatures fluttered through like moths finding a porch. The prefecture noticed, predators always do. A cruiser tipped its nose. Here they come, Cho whispered. Bring up the neighbor shield, Anaya said. It wasn't a shield in the storybook sense. It was ice. 37 comets diverted over 6 months, carved into panes and hung on micro-gimbals like a chandelier built by stubborn angels. When the cruiser fired, the beam hit the ice and shattered into a bouquet of lesser hurts. The Yuli convoy slipped free. The cover cost them 3 tugs and a pain that spun away like a broken tooth. A chime sounded an ethical audit, automatically assembled by the juror net. Outcomes, casualties, alternatives. Anaya stared at the list. Log it, she said. We own what we choose. On the prefecture flagship, someone made a note. Sol 3 exhibits irrational preference for non-combatant protection. Anaya would have preferred they called it grace. Commander, Cho said, hand to earpiece. We're getting chatter. Not human tongues. The Tesserae just broadcast a proverb I can't translate without swearing. The crew sang something that sounds like a lawsuit. It's beginning, Anaya whispered. Resistance never starts with cannons. It starts with vocabularies. The prefecture's language oath had always been a fuse disguised as a lullaby. Humanity had lit a different string. She barely had time to savor it when the room went colder than space. The flagship's profile unfolded like a predator stretching after a nap. News signatures, Cho said. Massive. Commander, that's not their demo beam. What is it? Doctrine, Cho said. They've summoned the Concorde Armada. The display populated with hulls. The kind that cut worlds into compliance and left thank you notes. President Hughes came back on screen. This time his eyes looked like winter had decided to stay. Commander, we've bought ours. Maybe a day. That's enough, she said, meaning, for a plan, for a prayer, for a word to grow teeth. She keyed fleet-wide. All ships, Article 0 stands. If you have a trick, now is the time to show it. If you have a neighbor, now is the time to be one. The Concorde's lead ship lowered a communications spike. Final recital, it said. Take the oath or be unmade. Anaya cut the channel and smiled without humor. We already swore? The Concorde fired. Cliffhanger. The first strike was colorless, a pressure on the teeth. It ate vector fields, not ships beautiful in a mathematician's way, murderous in everyone else's. It tore holes in navigation like moths in a wedding dress. 3 destroyers drifted, engines rear-eating lies. Sunstep, Anaya said. They'd practiced the move in Sims until crews could do it in their sleep, and then they'd ban sleep. Sail arrays bloomed from civilian frames, thin films, 30 kilometers wide, catching sunlight like fishermen catching laughter. They didn't block, they bent. The Concorde's guidance packets chased reflections and found a maze. Admiral's line holding, Cho said through clenched jaw. But they are using, Commander, they are hiding behind a refugee block. Anaya saw the old play. The Concorde had rescued a client convoy and now nested within it, using bodies as ablative shame. Fire, and you burn the innocent, hold, and you die tired. Options, she asked. Ram with soft heads. Overload their COMM stacks. Or, Cho didn't finish. Or accept the loss. Soft heads, Anaya said. The rammers weren't warheads, they were pillows with metal bones, designed by a kindergarten teacher from Nairobi who hated war and loved physics. They hit like slowed fists, intended to bruise systems, not break them. The first wave thudded into the Concorde's screening ships. Lights dimmed along imperial spines. Concorde adapting, Cho said. They are switching to pure kinetics. Neighbor shield, Tier 2, Anaya called. More ice, thicker, dirtier, seeded with ferromagnets rolled into place. The kinetic slugs struck, cracked panes, ricocheted into slugs behind them. Every piece of ice carried a name etched in microtext: grandmothers, union stewards, kids who'd collected bottles to fund a mirror. We can't make you bulletproof, the name said, we can make you less alone. A warning flashed, collateral risk escalating. Juror nodes demanded a vote. Anais swallowed. Quorum on escalation, limited strike to free the convoy? Consent ticked up. Stoics called assent the only thing we truly own. Today it glowed from a million screens. Target their COMM spine, Anais said. But with words. Lieutenant Cho grinned for the first time in hours. The Navajo team linguists and poets who refused Code Talker as a museum label and made it a living craft poured grammar into the concordance channel. The prefecture's command net depended on semantic parity. Orders had to resonate across dialects to execute. The team injected homonyms like seeds in a crack. The spine began to argue with itself. Fire became furnish, advance became advise, hold became help. A battleship politely requested tea of its own torpedo bay. The convoy peeled away. Relief tasted like salt on Anaya's tongue. The Concorde, offended, narrowed its attack. 2 human frigates died so quickly their last transmissions were punctuation. We can't keep this up, Cho said. We're not here to keep it up, Anaya said. She looked at the board and saw it, a pattern like footprints in fresh snow. The Concorde's doctrine assumed consent was a valve at the top of a pyramid. Article 0 had moved the valve into the street. You could crush a capital, you couldn't seize a million jurisdictions that were also people with casseroles and profanity. Send a message, she said. Short. To everyone. It went like this: we see you. We're tired too. Keep one light on. We're bringing neighbors. The Tesserae answered with an oath that involved thunderstorms and lawsuits. The Kruan sent a food map. The Ulii pinged an equation whose output was a lullaby. Commander, Cho said, voice small now. New contacts. Mass greater than anything short of a small god. She knew the signature before the computer labeled it. The prefecture called it the mandate, because tyrannies love a sacred noun. An extinction fleet, but painted with euphemisms. They'd used it 3 times in 5 millennia. Always clean. Always final. Screens populated with hulls like cathedrals sharpened into knives. The lead ship carried a name humans translated as Kindly Ledger. President Hughes came online, his voice stripped of sugar. Commander Reyes, we have maybe 12 hours. That's far more than we need, she lied. He knew she lied. He nodded anyway, which is what trust looks like under siege. Do you have a plan? He asked. Several, she said. All of them bad. Pick the one that tells a better story, he said. People fight longer for those. He cut, leaving the bridge buzzing with borrowed courage. Anaya turned to her team. We can't kill a mandate, she said. But we can starve it. Of what? Cho asked. Obedience, she said. And names. Cliffhanger. They called it the strike of names because war makes poetry whether you ask or not. The prefecture's discipline ran on anonymity, ranks as masks, orders as sterile hymns. Humanity and its new-made neighbors decided to do something painfully human, call people by who they were. The plan braided 3 chords. First, logistics, the midway trick writ large. They leaked that Mars had a coolant drought, that Luna's yards were late, that Earth's skyhooks were out of phase. The mandate redistributed itself, shifting tonnage to imaginary appetites. Gaps opened like the spaces between teeth. Second, signal, the concordance overload. The Navajo team and the Uli mathematicians mapped the mandate's legal semantic channels, then seeded them with litigable ambiguities, puns that were also proofs. The prefecture worship procedure. Humanity offered it a mirror with too many faces. Third, names. 100 million citizens recorded messages, teachers addressing a gunner by the birth name she'd tried to forget, a Kruan farmer blessing a mandate pilot in a dialect banned by his academy, an Uli child reciting the prefecture's own pledge and asking, simply, why? The neighbor net found crew rosters, matched them to school records, wedding notices, old songs. Privacy advocates balked, ethicists drafted consent frameworks in a day and a night, then put their own names first. Commander, Cho said, this is weird. So is being free, Anaya said. Transmit. The mandate arrived to a storm of proper nouns. Orders stalled because a petty officer was busy sobbing at her grandmother's voice. A gun deck slowed because a pilot heard his wedding vows in the language the prefecture had said was unfit for service. Not everyone paused. Enough did that the mandate's timing slipped a quarter beat. Window, Cho snapped. Push the sails, Anaya said. All tugs, sun step 2. Mirror fans to maximum. Neighbor shield to burn. The sky bloomed. Ice and film and grit moved like muscle. Slugs hit. Beams scattered. Whole districts of space turned into weather. Refugee lanes. Anaya asked. Green, Cho said. We got the kids through? Then we have done enough, Anaya said, and wished it felt like truth. The mandate pressed. You don't rule 5,000 years without redundancy. Their captains walled off the names, quarantined language like a plague. The kindly ledger opened its main throat. Commander, Cho said. Time for the bad plan, she said. Bring up the jury fleet. They didn't look like a fleet. They looked like what they were, ferries, boxy research pods, crop dusters turned vacuum mules, a heritage schooner someone had been restoring on a lake until the lake wasn't enough. Article 0 had made them citizens. Necessity made them soldiers without asking permission. The quorum voted hardest vote Anaya had ever seen on rules of engagement that only poets would love, hit only the guns, and only to make room for lifeboats. Jury fleet, she said on open band, you're up. They surged. A tug named after school smacked a mandate sensor field with a coil of rebar so ugly it became beautiful. A ship called Mrs. Ahmed's choir through a glitter storm of chaff woven from hymnals and tax forms. The kindly ledger sneered and fired, because empires always sneer when neighborhoods organize. Commander, Cho said. We can break their shield if we ram the ledger's arbiter core? With what? Cho didn't look at her. With us. Anaya pictured the hull, the crew, the coffee mug a tech had left under a console because he believed in later. She also pictured the ledger's core where command legality rippled into orders. Break the core, and the mandate would be an orchestra whose conductor had swallowed his baton. Juror quorum, she said, and the room held its breath. Motion, Authorized sacrificial strike by flagship to sever the Arbiter core and open lanes for evacuation, human and non-human alike. Lights climbed, reluctant stars. Motion carries, Cho whispered. He didn't look relieved. Anaya keyed the president. He didn't say don't. Leaders who understand service never do. He said, make it count. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat and thought of a bus map in Montgomery, of a code talker counting syllables against artillery, of a Dunkirk boatman checking the gas, of a belt miner's hands. She opened her eyes on a sky that had learned a new word and said it with conviction. All hands, she said. Set ramming course. Alarms made their thin brave music. The mandate's mouth widened. The jury fleet opened like a curtain. They ran. Cliffhanger. The ramming course felt like a promise carved into bone. The bridge quieted the way classrooms do before an exam, pencils sharpened, breaths measured, no one admitting fear because the next thing after fear is work. Engines leaned forward. The kindly ledger widened its maw, a cathedral of ordnance framed by doctrinal inscriptions that translated, roughly, order through consent. It would have been funny if it weren't backed by guns that could unwrite cities. Collision window in 90 seconds, Lieutenant Cho reported. His hands were steady. His left sleeve was singed, he hadn't noticed. Set the coil cargo to blossom, Anaya said. The coils weren't bombs. They were scaffolds from shipyards, braided with superconductors and wrapped in salvage netting, designed to explode outward into a bramble that starved fields and jammed the legal semiotic arbiter core the prefecture used to make commands lawful in a mathematical sense. Break the core and the mandate's orders would lose their ritual skin. Captains would have to own their killing with names, not numbers. Crew vote? She asked. Cho swallowed. Aye. He pulled up the juror screen. Faces flickered. Engineers, a nurse who ran the quiet room, a cook who smuggled extra fruit to sleepless techs, a poet who repaired coolant lines because words pay poorly in sieges. No one argued. They'd been arguing for months and had saved the good ones for what mattered. Proportionality. Double effect. The old horns of a moral dilemma sanded by a modern war's weird edges. Was the strike necessary? Could it be discriminate? Would it help refugees we could actually see? Motion. Sacrificial strike by flagship, Anaya said softly. Objective, sever arbiter core to open escape corridors. Rules, hit only command lattice, break only what blocks evacuation. All in favor. Light climbed like dawn on a stormy day. Against the wall, a small green diode labeled stoic someone's joke winked. Control what you can control, assent to what you assent to. Motion carries, Cho said. Get our people off, Anaya ordered. Essential crew remain to guide the blossom. I'm essential, Cho said too quickly. You're essential to tomorrow, she answered. Pod up. He didn't move. The room shifted around the fact of it. Lieutenant, she said, voice going steel. That's an order. He looked like a kid trying not to alarm his father by bleeding on the kitchen floor. If I leave, who keeps the Navajo band locked? If I leave, the soft head timing. You trained them, Anaya said. Their hands know the work. Go. He nodded once, as if beginning a prayer, and jogged for the pods with 6 others. The door sealed. The pods shot like punctuation into the sentence of battle. "Bring me the ledger's face," Anaya said. The display filled with the flagship's fluted nerves. Legal glyphs flowed from the arbiter core in disciplined rivers, turning commands into a liturgy. As civilization had decided that obedience felt cleaner if it arrived perfumed. Humanity had answered with Article 0, a single honest stink. 40 seconds, Helm reported. Mirror fans at burn. Jury fleet, Anaya broadcast. Peel left on my mark and sing their names again. Make them look at who they are. Across the net, a chorus rose neighbor tongues, rebel dialects, the Uli's click song mathematics calling mandate officers by childhood nicknames, pronouncing troopers schoolyard boasts, teasing a gunner about the time she'd lost a footrace to her dog. A few shots went wide. You can't aim a gun the same way with your grandmother in your ear. Enough stayed true to keep the sky honest. 20. Anaya felt the memory of an old map in her palm, bus lines redrawn to make a boycott possible, Bayard Rustin balancing lunch schedules like artillery tables, the logistics of dignity. We're just a big bus, she told herself, and grinned despite the lump in her throat. 10. President Hughes, she said on a narrow beam. His face slid into the corner, drawn tight. Tell them the rule holds, she said. We only break what cages. I'll tell them you kept the oath, he said. God, he stopped himself, not out of disbelief, but because words have gravity and he'd already used his allotment today. The kindly ledger's mouth filled the world. The arbiter core pulsed at its heart, a sphere of light inside light, like a choir counting in prime numbers. Anaya tasted copper. The coil cargo hummed as charge built. Now, she said. The blossom detonated not outward like violence, but sideways like patience, a net of glowing vines thrown at the core and cinched by algorithms written by people who love both poetry and safety rails. The bramble bit into doctrine. Legal light screamed. The ledger's command lattice burped static. Contact, Helm shouted. Metal kissed metal. The bridge pitched. Consoles died. Gravity forgot where it lived. Anaya stayed in her chair by choice and bold. The world narrowed to one instrument, a slider labeled righteous trouble by a technician with a sense of humor. She shoved it to full. Sparks. Smoke. The color went out of the sky. Core status, she coughed. Entangled, someone said from very far away. We've got them tangled. The kindly ledger began to stutter. Orders repeated, then contradicted, then arrived with half their verbs missing. Jury fleet, Anaya rasped. Run the lanes. Everybody else. The deck lifted, the stars spun, and the bridge wall became the floor. Everything went white. Cliffhanger. Sound returned as a cheap knock. Then the taste of burned plastic. Then pain everywhere like a weather report. Anaya blinked and saw the ceiling at an angle, hairline fractures running through it like spiderwebs that had decided to become cartographers. Someone was shouting. Someone was laughing. Someone was reciting names as if names could hold Hull together. Status, she croaked. Alive, said a voice she knew better than her own. Cho. He was not in a pod. He was at the auxiliary board with blood drying along his temple in a fine line. I lied to a superior officer, he added, not proud. Just present. You'll write yourself up after, Anaya said. Report. He pointed at the main tank. The kindly ledger's arbiter core showed as a pierced fruit, vines of coil logic wound through it like guilt through a conscience. Channels that had made killing neat now sputtered dialects and nicknames. The mandate's fire rate dropped a third, then half. A destroyer near Mars fired on its own escort warnings garbled into invitations. Another destroyer powered down entirely and began broadcasting an old folk song from a planet the prefecture renamed because history embarrasses tyrants. Evacuation corridors are open, Cho said. Refugee traffic green in 4 lanes. Ulii convoy clear. Tessari flotilla clear. Kruan half clear, we're nudging the rest with sail shadow. And us. He glanced around the listing ruin of their bridge. We're argumentative. The ship was bleeding heat like a saint giving away coats in winter. The coil blossom had cooked half their circuitries. You could fix a lot with a wrench and cussedness. Theology-resistant electrons were harder. Mandate response. Anaya asked. They are bringing up an annuller, Cho said. The word hung in the air with the weight it deserved. Not a gun in a cinematic sense. A procedural weapon that erased categories. It didn't vaporize matter, it unmade legal personhood. Anything tagged non-compliant in the prefecture registry became unclassifiable, and thus unprotectable, and thus fair game for everything that came after. It was how they made murder feel like bookkeeping. Trigger, she asked. 5 minutes to spool. Counter. Cho grimaced. Only if we can force their registry to label us as protected parties. He didn't say the rest. Protected parties in the prefecture lexicon had meant client species who had recited the language oath. Can we trick their lexicon? Anaya asked. The Navajo team is trying. If we can map their consent grammar, we might jam a clause in recognition of juror quorums as lawful persons under interstitial doctrine. I don't know if there is an interstitial doctrine. Make one, she said. Call it the No Fire Covenant. It needs their own precedent, Cho said, already pulling up case law like a gambler stacking chips. They deferred fire at Kel 9 when census integrity was in question. If we can make their census uncertain. Article 0 makes obedience uncertain by design, Anaya said, dizzy with the sheer audacity of it. We just have to show it to their machines. Commander, a comms tech called from a half-melted console. Incoming from President Hughes. His face appeared, ash-streaked, backlit by a room that had not appreciated being adjacent to a blossoming coil. Reyes, he said, using her surname like a hand clasp. You bought us lanes. The choir just pulled 100 kids off an old station that was supposed to be a museum. He swallowed. You need to know, Capitol Dome took a hit. I'm stuck where I am. Sir. No speeches, he said gently. I've been a speech maker my whole life. I want to be a good logistics officer on my way out. He lifted a stack of tabs. Ration flow is green. Water is yellow. We'll get there. Can you keep the covenant moving? We can if you can give us 90 seconds, Cho said. We need to force a census audit. Hughes smiled crookedly. I won elections by knowing where the people were. Let's win a war the same way. He vanished into a flurry of calls that had the cadence of grocery lists and battlefield maps. Commander, Cho said softly. We might not survive the annuller even if we win the argument. Then we die mid-sentence, Anaya said. There are worse epitaphs. The Navajo team's window opened. A web of clauses poured toward the mandate's logic core. Jury recognized, quorum valid, personhood present. The ULI added a proof that any system which could not distinguish consent from coercion lacked standing to judge consent at all. The Kruan stapled a food map to the argument because in their law a census that didn't count meals wasn't a census. Spool at 80%, Cho said. We need a hook. Anaya blinked through smoke and thought of Selma, of men and women calculating feet per minute over bridges because cameras and batons obeyed math, too. Hook them on their own mercy, she said. Find any deferral, call it precedent, call it sacred. If they ever spared a hospital because someone's ledger said child, bake it into the core. Cho's fingers danced. Found one, he breathed. A training scenario. They paused fire when a clinic's census updated late. I can make the soul registry look like it updates forever. Do it. The mandate's annuller peaked. Lights across the ledger went damp red. Time slowed into syrup. The sky leaned, waiting. Covenant injected, Cho said. Nothing happened. Then everything did. The annuller hiccuped. Its targeting list refilled with a word pending. Legal processes spun. A small icon, a stylized cradle, prefecture standard for protected dependent, popped up on the soul registry, then multiplied like a glitch that wanted to be a gospel. We're all children now, Cho said, half laugh, half sob. Hold the lanes, Anaya said. Tell the jury fleet. A beam tore across the bow. Consoles jumped. The world became bad music again. Commander, someone screamed. The kindly ledger is pivoting a mass driver. Anaya tasted blood. We got 90 seconds, she said through iron teeth. Let's spend them. Cliffhanger. They spent them the way poor families spend holidays, making more out of less, stringing light from whatever wasn't broken. The jury fleet reformed in ragged tiers, school bus yellow and tug gray and research white, shouldering up like a wall whose bricks had volunteered. Mrs. Ahmed's choir surged to the front with a hymn rewritten into a timetable, 12 seconds for the tesserae to slip between mirrors, 8 seconds for Kruan lifeboats to cut into the shadow of a derelict antenna, 20 for ULI mathematicians to rotate a sail array into a proof no gun could ignore. The Covenant is holding in their lower courts, Cho reported, eyes wide as if he could keep the annuller in abeyance by not blinking. Upper court review in 40. The kindly ledger spat a slug the size of a cathedral. The neighbor's shield caught it on a pane of ice seeded with brake dust and prayers. The pane shattered, a winter exploded in vacuum. Chaff scattered like confetti at a funeral. Casualty reports. Anaya asked, the way one asks about the weather and means everything else. Jury fleet, 27 hulls gone bright, Cho said. No names, not yet. Names came after, candles and casseroles and a long season of telling stories to children who needed to know how courage sounds when it clears its throat. Refugees, most accounted for. Most is a country we don't live in, Anaya said. Push the lullabies. He shot her a look. Fine, she said. The litigable lullabies. The Navajo team folded cadence into case law again, packing the mandate's channels with homophone snares and cultural footnotes. The ULI harmonized with proofs about empty sets and unfalsifiable consent. The Tesserae injected a proverb that translated to, if your law hates bread, call a different baker. The ledger's COMM spine looped the command 3 times and then forgot what it wanted. On the mandate's wing, a cruiser peeled out of formation and pointed its nose away from Earth. Its captain spoke on open band in a voice that cracked on syllables no prefecture academy taught. I will not fire on those who refuse to recite our oath, she said. My grandmother taught me 2 languages, one of them belongs to me. Her crew cheered once, like a cough, and then got very busy running for their lives. Mutinies in 5 nodes, Cho said. Surprise and hope braided in his mouth until they sounded like a relative no one expected to visit and was glad to see. Exploit, Anaya said. Peel the low-G morale units, flood them with names. Force the ledger to reassign to loyalty enforcement. The kindly ledger did exactly that because empires are predictable when their metrics wobble and diverted power to internal discipline. Its mass driver dimmed. Its annuller paused on another pending. Upper court review now, Cho said, hands trembling over a console that barely believed in electrons anymore. If they overturn the covenant, we go dark. Then we appeal to a higher court, Anaya said. The court of everyone watching. She cut to wideband. This is Anaya Reyes of Soul, she said. You've heard our Article 0. You've watched our neighbors sing names into the mouths of guns. If you are client to the prefecture and you can hear me, I have one request, hold one light on. If they order you to kneel, put your hands in your pockets and take them out empty. If they tell you to recite, tell them you forgot your vowels. If they ask for tribute, show them your grocery list instead. And if you have to run, run toward us. It wasn't a great speech. It wasn't even good. It was honest and timed well. The prefecture's upper court blinked. A decision scrolled, covenant not recognized. Annuller permissions restored. Commander, Cho whispered. I see it, she said. Time. 10 seconds. Mrs. Ahmed's choir opened her hull to show her choir indeed 35 kids and grandparents strapped to micro choirs, voices braided with Kruan seed shakers and Ulii clicks and Tesserae thunder hand claps. The song wasn't in tune. It was in time. The mandate's fire control stuttered as training sims flagged the sound as civilian distress. Someone, once, had written a humane clause. The choir found it. 5, Cho said. Anaya stared at the kindly ledger and thought of all the ledgers before it. Farmers cheated, workers undercounted, votes discarded, bodies unaccounted. No more, she said to the math. 3. The mandate's annuller lit. 2. A new signature tore into the battle space, angled hulls, painted in a color Anaya had never seen on a warship. Joyful. 1. The Tesserae free compacts dropped out of shadow with half the Kruan cohort and something that looked suspiciously like a prefecture mutiny squad wearing their uniforms inside out. They broadcast one word in 100 languages, and it wasn't poetry, it was logistics, here. The annuller coughed and died without firing. Cliffhanger. Afterwards, the kindly ledger limped away under a screen of its own shame, mutinies growing like mold in a damp storeroom, allies peeling off in guilty little flocks, command channels clogged with pending and grandma-voiced names. The mandate didn't break that day, nothing so tidy. It thinned. It leaked authority. It spent the next year like a tall building full of termites pretending wind is the problem. Seoul did not celebrate. We were too busy counting. The jury fleet's roll call lasted 3 days and spilled into a fourth because some names wanted to be told with recipes or jokes. President Hughes did not make it to the end. He spent his last hours on a cot in a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and coffee, signing ration orders and a single page with 12 words, Article 0 remains in force even if I am not. The page went into the archive with fingerprints where tears had failed to evaporate before someone said, gently, "Sir, that's not acid-free," and found a better sleeve. The tesserae docked. The Gruen traded recipes for sealant. The Ulii audited our grief. We turned wreckage into memorials because we had more wreckage than money, and even rich memorials don't comfort like a hand on your back while you fill out a form you can't bear to read. Lieutenant Cho wrote himself up for disobeying an order. Anais signed the reprimand and pinned a thin blue ribbon to his collar that meant, right disobedience at the right time. The prefecture tried to reassert the language oath. It found that the word it feared had learned to conjugate. Article 0 appeared in migrant camps and city halls. A Gruen version that translated to "we do not rent our throats" ran like fire through their markets. The Ulii proved in 3 journals and 1 bedtime story that consent without reversibility is theft. Tesserae artisans carved a clause over their courthouse: if a law cannot feed a child, it does not get to starve a mother. The prefecture conducted raids with increasing irritation and decreasing effect. History does not pivot on a single day, people say. They are right and they are lying. The day the choir sang into the mandate's mouth, the line moved. Not enough for comfort. Enough for work. 2 years later, the Concorde Armada fractured. Captains formed caucuses. Some defected openly, some pretended confusion and then never arrived at their assignments. A prefecture commissioner published a dissent saying the oath had become idolatry. She vanished and reappeared on series teaching kids how to fold gulls from scrap foil. Empires end this way, not with a statue falling, but with somebody's aunt explaining bread to someone who learned to boil rocks. 5 years later, the Sensorum prefecture had a new name nobody liked and less territory. What lasted was a council built in a mess, the compact of neighborhoods, stitched from 100 species who agreed on 3 lines and argued about everything else in a tone that sounded, improbably, like love. They signed at a shipyard because all the fancy halls made people talk like furniture. Article 0 sat at the top, in type big enough that no one had to squint, in languages that were still growing. Anais stood where the flagship's bow had once been, now a small garden under a canopy of old mirror fans. Kids practiced emergency drill turns between planter boxes. Cho taught them how to swear politely in 5 tongues and how to ask consent in 6. On a wall, the names of the jury fleet wove a braid. People touched them the way fingers learn a rosary gratitude by repetition. A worker from the choir asked Anaya to say something official. She tried, and found she mostly wanted to say thank you, which is not a policy but sometimes is better. She told a story instead, of a bus map in Montgomery, a leak at Midway, a linguist on a cold deck who made law from a lullaby. We win, when we win, because we decide to be neighbors in public, she said. We lose, when we lose, because we forget names. A Eli child raised a limb. Is Article 0 a weapon? They clicked. No, Anaya said. It's armor around your mouth. It's a vow that your yes will mean yes and your no will not be rented. What if someone stronger says we must? The child asked. Anaya looked at the sky where, once, a ledger had tried to tally people like grain. Then we do what our grandparents did, she said. We keep our hands busy and our words clean. We find the clause that still has a human fingerprint on it and we push. And when it breaks, we feed each other. Later, in the quiet, she opened the archive and read Hugh's 12 words. She touched the old diode labeled Stoic and it lit as if it were still wired to the ship's stubborn heart. She thought briefly, as the grief seasons allow those who hadn't made it to this garden, not as debts but as investments that had matured. In classrooms, the kids learned the covenant alongside algebra. In courts, judges quoted poets when statute ran out of breath. On docks, news sails with wild colors caught sunlight and bent it into corridors that led outward. The galaxy did not become kind overnight. It did become argumentative in the best sense. On the anniversary of the ramming, ships from a dozen worlds formed up over Ganymede. They opened a channel and said one word that still felt like a sunrise. Not a prayer. A policy. A promise. No,